Okay, in my personal point of view, I think because I was born in like Indonesian culture and it is one of like Asian culture, some family they mistreated their children according to their gender. Some family they allow their son to have a higher education, to pursue education outside of the border or like in another city. But again, they limit their daughter to do so. Sometimes they only can, they do not allow them to pursue higher education, or even if they allow it, they would only do it in the same city as the parents were living there. So they can control them. So this is kind of like mistreated among parents to their children according to their gender. And then this happens a lot because I know some of the phenomenon. For me, basically, we cannot treat them differently because everyone has equal rights, equal human rights. Men, either they're men or they are women. So that's all.
我觉得新闻上面会，然后大家会讨论，比如说杀女，然后还有荣誉自杀，honor suicide， 这些内容，然后不见得是我想不见得是完全跟宗教伊斯兰宗教教义有关，只是在这个社群里面发生，然后我觉得可能我会关注的是世俗的女性主义者怎么去理解在伊斯兰国家或伊斯兰社群里面的女性运动者他们的运作方式，就不见得这两者的观念是完全相牵在一起，或者是说不同伊斯兰社群里面的女性运动者他们的运动方式。可能我自己认为，他们有时候被世俗的女性主义者是不理解的，或者世俗国家常常会有一种要救伊斯兰穆斯林的女性于水深火热之中这种观念。但是对我来说，我觉得这可能就是会是一种很自大的想法，所以这可能是我目前对伊斯兰内部的女性的权利，以及在争取女性运动的人的想法，尤其是我看到有些女性运动者，他们可能在重新尝试诠释《可兰经》，然后用一个可能过去可能话语权比较是在男性身上的解释方式之外的诠释角度，然后这个诠释的方式以及这个操作手法又如何可能比如说被运用到土耳其他们世俗的政党跟宗教的政党上，那宗教的政党如何去利用这件事情来合理化或者是说增值自己的党派的利益。所以我觉得这好像就是女性权益好像在伊斯兰社群里面现在也就是有很多涟漪，然后这个涟漪不只是在争取女性权益上，包括还有牵扯到一些党派之间的冲突，我是这样理解。
Well, I know some people have stereotyped that women should stay at home, or for example in the married life as a wife we only can taking care of our children, we decide to not work outside. But for me, as a Islam woman, we have our right choice. In my real life, I have my own right choice to pursue my dream as far as I want. Because for me, Islam has flexible rules that Islam is not limiting our boundaries. We can just adjust it, depends on our situation.
其实我自己本身比较有关注的是中国的维吾尔少数民族这样子。那为什么会去关注？其实因为我蛮好奇，就是中国那边的关系这样子。那我知道的是，他有一点迫害维吾尔的那一个嫌疑，但是其实他们当局不承认啊。那我很愿意相信国际社会就是他们的观点这样子。我是觉得可以再深入的去调查。那我是对，就是这样吧。
主要前阵子就是最近就是统一班嘛，那前阵子是那个在新疆，
对，
然后中国政府对维吾尔族想要进行汉化，然后对他们的传统，那在更可能几十年，那中东那里因为以色列复国嘛，那他们就夺走原本在那里巴勒斯坦人的领地，那在那里就是周围的伊斯兰国家、中东国家对以色列的仇视，然后产生的那些冲突。
如果是说关于我有没有就是对穆斯林还有伊斯兰教有了解的话，我自己是比较少接触到这边的新闻的。那可能比较常看到就是报纸上会写说，就是可能有些我不知道那是个人行为吧，就是伊斯兰的那个恐怖分子，然后会发动一些比较对社会比较震惊的一些事件，这样子。那我基本上接触到的资讯都是这些。
Well, when I was like in grade 9, there was the Boston explosion, a terrorist attack, and when I didn't know much about Islam before, but I was a fangirl of Zayn Malik. You know him? One Direction, Zayn Malik, and I saw him got a lot of hate on Twitter, and I was like, that was so strange to me that I don't know what he has to do with the marathon explosion, and that was the first time I get to know what's the word? Islamophobia.
About the current issue, I think I'm going to come up with this is not the current news, but later it happened in like last year when we know that the tragedy happened in France when someone tried to paint or draw our big and great Prophet Muhammad SAW, peace be upon him. Because in Islam perspective or Islamic law, we are not allowed, everyone of Muslim, we are not allowed to draw or paint any kind of pictures of our own Prophet because no one can resemble him. And then there's this case happened in France when someone tried to draw him in a picture, tried to paint him in a picture and resemble him like a human being. We know that our Prophet Muhammad is also a human being, but no one can picture him, and no one are allowed according to Islamic perspective and Islamic law. And then no one has done it ever since. But because of this French law, they are argue that they have this kind of like freedom. But again, their freedoms against the border of Islamic perspective of Islamic law. And this is what happened when this tragedy happened. One of Muslim in France, they kill the suspected of people who draw, of the person who draw the caricature or the paint of our prophet. And then we definitely condemn this kind of like action of the murdering. But again, we also condemn the person who tried to pictures of our great Prophet Muhammad SAW.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming back for our final session. Over the past 3 days, we've covered and thought through and discussed together issues of Muslim communities in the minority group Uyghur in Xinjiang, China, countries in Middle East, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Palestine. We've discussed and seen movies and listened to keynote lectures on political persecution, women's honor killing, or all these crimes against Muslim communities around the world. And many of those crimes are not punished. The impunity of this phenomenon, this act, this deeds, is something that we need to think. And some of those crimes are done within Muslim communities against one another, against different sects. And some of them are against women and children. And some of those are oppression from their local government against their communities. We all know that there are many questions that cannot really be solved once and for all. We need to understand our contemporary conditions, the geopolitical or geohistorical context. We also need to go back to history, the complex historical processes, so that we know how our contemporary world is constituted or formed, so-called local culture or local political regime. Well, we're very happy that we have this final roundup roundtable as our closing session. We have scholars, students, journalists, writers from different countries. I especially want to thank Professor Farid for his bridging this connection and contact and invite his friends to join us. So I'll give the mic to Professor Farid, and he will introduce each one of them, and we will proceed for today's roundtable discussion. Yeah, Farid, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Liu. I'm also, very grateful to Professor Liu and her team, and I think it's nice, especially for me, being a social scientist. It's nice to be also involved in the arts and to look at the world through film and arts. So I'm grateful for that. And we are ending the 3 days with this roundtable discussion, which I hope will be equally lively as the earlier sessions. So I don't want to take much time, so let me just quickly introduce the presenters. As I understand it, each presenter will spend about 5 minutes. Is that right? And then we'll open it up for general discussion. So we have Dr. Samir Talat from Jordan, who represents the Islamic Circle of Taiwan. That will be followed by Mr. Adib Faiz from Malaysia. He's a writer and independent scholar. Third, we have Mr. Barmever Syed Noruzuha from India. He's a PhD candidate at NTHU in Taiwan. Fourth, Mr. Bilal Ahmad Malik, who is from India. He's a research scholar. This will be followed by Mr. Asif bin Ali from Dhaka, Bangladesh. He is an Erasmus Mundus fellow, currently doing his graduate studies. And our sixth speaker will be Siti Nur Humaira Azman from Singapore. She's an undergraduate at the National University of Singapore. And seventh, we have Ms. Noora Jukaku from India, a graduate student in doing a master's in Inter-Asia Cultural Studies at NYCU. And finally, but as they say, last but not least, we have Mr. Mustafa Pur Muhammadi from Iran, who is a producer based in Tehran, Iran. We begin with Dr. Samir Talat.
Yes, okay, excellent. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sure. Let me just give me 1 minute to introduce myself in this 5 minutes, which is really very short, but I will try to be very sharp and short and reach to the point. First of all, I am graduated from Jordan University, and it's an honor for me to come here again. And I am so happy that my university come and host this activity. This is really very honor, and really I am happy to see this kind of interaction and Taiwanese people really willing to learn more about Islam and so on. I have been in Taiwan for a long time. I finished my PhD here and work also here in very high-level research institute in Taiwan. My wife is Taiwanese, so I really face some of the difficulties sometimes to explain for some friends about the Islam and give the message. So given that, we already established one organization called ICT, Islamic Circle of Taiwan. We are located mainly in Hsinchu, but this message for all of Taiwan. And this is really, we are trying to make connection between Muslims themselves and also connection with the non-Muslim and really deliver the message of Islam and let them know and understand the thing. It's quite interesting actually during this period of time. Sometimes people get some information from like media or sometimes based on their own religion. So they just try to make some image about Islam or give some images. So some of them is actually not quite correct. And I just like pick some of them which really, I get them very often. So I try to explain for them and let you have like a better idea what is the correct answer. Let me put the full screen. So there are some of misconceptions. I just try to go through of them. Some looking for me in the beginning when I hear them, but it's really good to, I have the chance to explain the correct direction. For example, I have seen people like in the beginning when I was telling them I am praying and so on, they think I am praying for some black box. So this is like some kind of interpretation, similar like Buddhism or some other religion. You go to some temple and then you pray. So you are praying for this God and something like this. The point actually, just to make it very clear, this is not the correct thing. We are praying toward Mecca, but actually we are praying for God, only God. And the Arabic name for God is Allah. So this is really very basic information, but it's really quite interesting that I have seen many people, like, especially in the beginning when I come to Taiwan, like more than 15 years ago, this was like very shocking for me. But I think now Taiwanese Muslim is really learning more and something like this. The second one, I have noticed that many of the Taiwanese, like, they think that the people who believe in Islam mostly are Arab, but this is actually not correct. Arab is only 18% among all of Muslims. There are more than like 80% are non-Arab. So you can imagine that the culture is different and so on. The belief is the same, but actually the culture will be diverse from one country to another country, like what kind of food, what kind of clothes and so on. But the principle of faith is still the same. But this really sometimes, like, if I come and eat some food from my friends from Indonesia, sometimes it's very spicy for me. I cannot really handle the food or something like this. the food, our food, for example, is more like Mediterranean food and something like this. So this is really quite interesting. Like when I meet some friends, they are just thinking the Muslims are Arab, but this is not quite correct. The third point, actually, the Messenger Muhammad, I have seen like many Taiwanese think that we are worshipping him as a person, but this is not quite correct. The correct thing, it need to be very clear that Muslims believe he is the final messenger, giving the revelation from God, and he just giving to all of the people. So Muslims, again, is worshipping only God over here. The fourth point I want to, it's quite interesting actually, but I don't know, I get it like a couple of times, like if you want to reach to God or pray for God, maybe you need to go on top of a mountain, or even I have been asked, this is funny question, like if you are on top of Burj Dubai, that you will be closer to God. This is like how it's interesting. But for us as a Muslim, we believe God is the creator directly. There is no need for mediator to deliver the message for you. So at any moment you want to live, to pray for God, you can just connect to him directly, and that's it. The fifth point, and
Sorry, you need to wrap up for this session because
okay, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so the fifth point are Muslims not only believe in Muhammad and believe in God, also we believe in all of the messengers. I just leave you for the last couple of points, and so you can read it very quickly. But one thing that, like for example, Muslim usually fast from the first day of light till the sunset. So this is really, as a concept, when I come and introduce it for many of Taiwanese friends, they think I will die or it will be really not very healthy for us. But actually, we rest up, and many Muslims really do it everywhere. And this is even medically proved to be very good for our body. And we can pray at any place. We are not really need to pray in the praying room in the mosque. This is open for all of us. And sometimes about the food, we cannot really tolerate like drinking or eating pork. So sometimes mixing the food with this is really not good for us. And sometimes out of hospitality, actually, our friend Taiwanese, they are trying to show us like, hey, please eat this or something like this. But actually this is like, you are just like crossing the line for us, but we are still appreciate this. And I think right now, even if I go around in Taiwan, this is like much more friendly and people understand this. Actually, I just leave the contact information in the beginning, and we are located here in Taiwan, and we don't, you can reach us at any moment. And if you have any question, please come to us, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samir. So we now move to Adib.
So thank you very much, Prof, and thank you to the organization for inviting me to speak at this event. Now my topic is self-portraits, Muslim filmmakers and the depiction of intercommunal interaction. So I'm basically going to look at how Muslims have represented themselves specifically in connection with this theme of intercommunal interaction, how Muslims have depicted this idea. But I want to start with this image, which is an artist's rendition of an event from the 11th century. Ibn al-Haytham was an Arab Muslim scientist. He actually developed what you see here, which is basically the first camera. It was called the dark room, and in Latin it was translated to camera obscura, which is later shortened to camera. So this is the first film camera, actually. It's not the first film camera, but it's the first camera. And that technology becomes the basis of film and of all the cinematic effects that we have now. So I'm starting with this because when we talk about Islam and cross-cultural communication and film, we don't want to see film as something that's separate. It's actually bound into Islamic history, and the exchange of information is actually what produced that device, that image, the camera. And what we have today. So the art form of film is a link to the camera. Now, in terms of intercultural communication, cross-community communication, we can go on and on about it, but we could essentially break it down to 3 levels: the conceptual, the social, and the individual. And this has been represented in different ways in different films. So first we have the conceptual. Now, what do I mean when I say conceptual? When we talk about communication, one of the things we exchange is ideas and concepts. So in the context of Islam, it's what's the ethical vision of Islam? What does Islam represent? What's the spirituality? Or some of the ideas that were being shared by our previous presenters, some of the ideas about misconceptions, correcting those things. So if we look at this film is by Mustafa Akkad. It was done in the 1970s, called The Message. And it basically represented, the story depicts the early history of Islam, the foundation of Islam in pre-Islamic Arabia. So it's a historical drama, and this was really the first time, the significance of this film, that was the first time really that you saw Islam represented on the screen in a big way by a Muslim, because Mustafa Akkad was a Syrian Muslim. And he felt he could tackle the subject matter better than anyone else because he understood the subject matter. So it was the first time that audience, and so that was a communication of ideas. The audience got to hear about the social vision of Islam, especially the emphasis on racism and the place of race. So that's just one example. Now, on the second level, we have the social level. So when we talk about cross-cultural communication, how do social groups interact? How do Muslims, in particular, how do Muslims interact when they are in a minority? Like what, or they're in the same space, same shared social space as other groups, like Buddhists or Christians. How do we do that? So one way is to look at and these are 2 very different films, but they deal with a similar theme. So the film on the left you see is called The Ornaments of Lhasa. So that deals with an old Muslim community. So The Ornaments of Lhasa is about Islam in Tibet. When I say Islam in Tibet, I mean Tibetan Muslims. They have been Muslims for generations. They've lived side by side with their Buddhist neighbors. And they've always interacted. On the street, you would not be able to distinguish between a Muslim and a Buddhist. It's only when you go into the houses that you see the difference. So this is about integration. If you look at the film on the right, this film is called Blessed Are the Strangers. Now this is about a young Muslim community in the 1970s in the UK. So it's about that process of them trying to find their place, find what it means to be British and Muslim, and what that means. Now the last point I want to cover is the individual. So when we talk about communication, what is the role that the individual plays? I myself as a person, or all of us as individual people, how do we interact with people, and how does our own personal journey, our own spiritual journey, whether we're Muslim or not, how does that affect the process of communication? So one film that's dealt with this very interestingly is Between Two Worlds by Ovidio Salazar, and it's about a Swedish diplomat named Muhammad Knut Bernström. He's from Sweden, and he went to North Africa and he became a Muslim, and then he went back to Sweden essentially. Well, regardless, he translated the Quran into Swedish. So he didn't go back to Sweden, I think, but he translated the Quran into Swedish for a Swedish-speaking audience for the first time, and it was done by a Muslim. But that's on the surface level. If you actually watch the film, it's about his own spiritual journey and how within himself he navigates the different worlds, the 2 worlds that he's from, the Swedish world and Islamic world, and also how his own personal interaction with people in this process actually changes people's minds. Now, the last film here is called 1 in 13 Million by Adrian Story. And this film essentially is about a Japanese imam. So he's a Japanese convert, and he is, I think, the only imam in Tokyo, at least at the point when this film was made. It's a very short film, but he's an imam, that's his calling, and then his day job is he's a tattoo artist, a tattoo and pierce artist. So it's very interesting because he navigates these 2 worlds, and it's also about his own spiritual journey, and through the use of photographs. No film. I mean, he did a longer film later, but use of still photographs, he actually shows the complexity of his life and how it's very striking. This man, and looks like he came out of Turkey or Egypt, this Japanese man in the middle of a Japanese train station, that kind of thing. So that's the last film. Now, just before I close, I want to say that when we look at film and cross-cultural communication, very often we look at film as something observing an object, you know, that it's capturing something objectively. But really, when we actually look at film, it's like all other art. It represents, in many senses, the filmmaker and the artists themselves and what they think of themselves. So when we're really looking at how Muslims depict themselves and this theme of intercultural communication, we're not just looking at the subject, how the Muslim understands himself or herself and how and their place within society. And hopefully in so doing, we can come to a greater understanding, not just as Muslims or Buddhists or anything else, but just as human beings and within our own selves. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adib. Thanks very much. I think it was interesting to bring in the discovery of the camera at this session, which is about films, as you noted just now.
Yes.
All right. So now we move on to Barmaver Syed Nuruzuha.
Respected professors, organizers, and audience, the topic that I'm going to present today is about portrayal of Muslims as terrorists in media and films. So you see, in many movies, web series that we see, or productions about terrorism, Islamophobia has undoubtedly infected these web series or movies and films. You can see the picture here. This is from the movie. There's a makeup artist, and he's Muslim as a terrorist, is being shown as a scary person. Just by looking at it, you'll feel scared. This is how it's portrayed and shown in media, in web series, and on and on. But there's one thing, that message that you get, from these movies, from these web series, that, hey, not all Muslims are bad. I know a Muslim, he's my friend, he's so nice. Not all Muslims are bad, but the most terrorists, they're Muslims. I don't say all Muslims are bad, but most terrorists and terrorist attacks, it's by Muslims. But this is against the reality. And I'm quoting statistics. For example, you see here is by global terrorist data set. If you see in European Union alone, the data here, see the first one, you see 62.5% attacks is by European organizations. And you see Islamic, those who consider false, those who have false idea of jihad. I will not even call jihad. I mean, those who do attacks in the name of 0.89%. And this is not my data. This is data by global terrorist data set. Also, likewise, you see here, I have put, the screenshot from the New York Times and other newspapers here. So there's a study which says that majority of terrorists who attack America, they are not Muslims. They are not Muslims. And those attacks that are done by right-wing extremists, it's twice as many incidents as terror attacks associated with Islamic domestic terrorism. So this is like to address the point that you get through media and movies that, most terrorists are Muslims. But why do we see that, if Muslims, if there are, attacks by Muslim are not so much compared to other attacks, then why do you always see terrorism, Muslim, terrorist, Muslim? It's because of media. And this is not me saying, you see, this is research by University of Alabama. They show that, if the attack is done by Muslims, it receives 357% more press attention. So you know the reason now. Because you know what is being fed to you, what is being shown to you in media, in newspapers, in movies. Now, you see, terrorism is not only, you'll not find only Muslims doing it. It's not only Muslims, only Muslim terrorists. You have terrorists in all religions. You have Buddhist terrorists. This is a Time magazine, the front cover. You have Hindutva terrorism. Lots of organizations in India. You have atheists who are known to do terrorist attack. This is from Washington Times. An atheist preacher killed 26 worshippers. You have Jewish terrorists. For example, from Jewish news paper, Haaretz, it says Israel needs to deal with its Jewish terrorists. You have Christian terrorists, and this is a recent news, the Christian terrorists, they were attacked. I mean, they were arrested in Kansas. So now what drives? Okay, it's true. I don't deny that there are Muslim terrorists. There are Muslim extremists. You know, they are responsible for terrorism. But according to one of the top experts on Islamic terrorism, he says that, you know, that it's not Islam that drives young Europeans to jihad. Again, this is false understanding of jihad. Like, according to this top terrorism expert, there are some other reasons. For example, he quotes so many. I mean, like, for example, oppression done to particular group of people, you know, or, you know, raping their family members. And there are so many other reasons and so many emotional things, you know, that are being played down. So the message is that teaching itself that takes them to these people, you know, those who are infected with this kind of violent ideology is not Islam. Rather, there are other factors. This is what top anti-terrorism expert is saying. And I'd like to conclude by saying that, you know, those extremists who claim to be Muslim and those who do attack under the name of Islam, they do not belong to any one sect, because many people, they try to paint, you know, oh, this sect, they have terrorism. But I tell you, there are terrorist extremists in different groups, in Sunni, in Shias, in Sufis, you know, it looks like peaceful, in Sufis, in Salafis, in different sects. And I can name organization of all this. Since there's no time, I'd like to conclude my talk with this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I think the statistics are very, very telling. They mean a lot. So I think something that we can discuss later during the general discussion is what explains why the media reports the way they report about Islam, even though the statistics would not imply what the media implies. Okay, thank you. Now on to Mr. Bilal Malik.
Thank you, Professor Farid Al-Tas, for inviting us to be part of this wonderful roundtable discussion. Thank you. I'm sorry I cannot share my PP presentation because there is some problem with my laptop, so I'm using my phone now. So please bear me with. I just need your excuse for that. So you can just read the topic is about stereotyping and misrepresentation of Muslims in the Bollywood movies. Okay, so if you go and see the history of Indian cinema, what we can do, we can just simply divide the Indian cinema into two periods. The first period is after the partition. Okay, we call it the classical period of Indian cinema, and then starting from the last decade of 20th century, we can say now the Indian cinema entered into the modern cinematography. So, but there has been stereotyping of Muslims in both periods, but there is a change. For example, in the classical period, what they call as Muslim social, they were portraying the Muslim aristocracy, the emperors, the kings, and the courts, and the nawabs, and the tawaif, the dancing woman. And there was particular about women, that women were filmed like they were depicted and portrayed as covered in the niqab, the Islamic dress. And after, as I said, when there was a change in the whole discourse, I connect this change with the discourse, like what was the discourse on the nationalism. Initially, it was more close to secularism. So there were movies like Amar, Akbar, Anthony, like which portrayed the brotherhood among different religions. Amar was a Hindu, and Anthony was a Christian, and Akbar was, of course, a Muslim. And there were movies and films which depicted, the Muslim character, like someone who is very noble, very generous, very kind. But it changed a lot after there was a change, a dramatic and a terrible change in the discourse about, how do you define the nation and what's the definition of the nationalism. So, with the start of, the change in the discourse about nationalism, and especially, something motivated and triggered by religious ideology, religious fanatics. So it changed the Indian cinema as well. How it affected the Indian cinema now, Muslims are not shown like Nawabs and the emperors as it was previously shown in the pictures like Aurangzeb, Mughal-e-Azam, Pakiza. These are the names of some movies, which were filmed during 1960s, 1965, 1970 and onwards. And then the change happened after, I guess, in the last decade of the 20th century, 90 onwards to 2000, and it continues. So now the trend is that Muslims are, portrayed as gangsters, like terrorists and despots, and the one who betrayed the nation. Okay, so this has changed the picture, the whole picture about Muslim character, through the cinema. Okay, so according to, I will just quote one professor from London University, Professor Rachel Dyer. She's a professor of Indian culture and cinema at SOAS London. So according to her research, she says that there are top 10 Muslim characters which are, portrayed and depicted in the Indian cinema, the Bollywood movies. They are very popular stereotypes. For example, she says that it is veiled beauty. As I said, in the earlier times, it was the woman was, portrayed as a veiled and a covered object. The kings and emperors, and then we have, it's according to her, intolerant Muslim. We have the gangster. We have the Pakistanis. Then the terrorist, and then of course there is a recent trend, a modern Muslims. Okay, so these are some popular, depictions. How Indian cinema is representing the Muslim character in the movies. And according to Ira Bhaskar, she is the author of Islamic Culture and Bombay Cinema. Okay, so she's a JNU. She's a professor at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. So according to her, the representation of, I'm quoting her, the representation of Muslims in Indian cinema is very complex. It involves both surrender and pushback. Okay, so if you see the recent movies, like we have Zakham, we have Fana, we have Mission Kashmir, then we have Sultan Mirza. We have to the list we have Rais, which is recently filmed. Which was recently telecasted. Okay, Rais. These pictures you will see there's a different stereotyping of Muslim identity and Muslim character. Now what you will see, it seems like there's a person, and yes, not to forget about the role of Ranbir Kapoor in the Padmavat, which was a very controversial picture. So what do you see? The character is, the image is like a kohol-eyed, or the surma-eyed and kurta-clad, which is a typical Muslim dress. Person comes onto the screen, and there is bullets sitting everywhere. There is killing. There are butchers. Different kind of terrible and horrible scenes, like as if it depicts a kind of intolerant mentality, violent mentality, and this has created a kind of otherization, I could say, among the Muslim, among the whole Indian society towards Muslims.
But the time is up, so please wrap up for the session.
Okay, so I will conclude here that there has been a dramatic change in the stereotyping and misrepresentation of, I mean, it was there in the initial cinema in the classical period. Now it has taken a different form. Now Muslims are depicted as, you know, gangsters, like the whole underworld is run by Muslims, and they are violent people, intolerant people. This is the new image of Muslims, you know, portrayed through the new movies which came into, I mean, in the cinema after the change in the discourse about nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Bilal. Again, I think the opportunity later on to discuss changes in film in industry. As you said, the stereotypes change. We also noticed that there's some attempt to normalize Muslims or Islam in film. Since the 90s anyway, or the late 90s, you find it more common to see women in hijab in some TV series. So there's maybe, I don't know, but some attempt to normalize that. Something maybe we can pick up later. So now we turn to Mr. Asif bin Ali. Asif.
Hello, Professor Farid, and hello, everyone, my colleagues and those who are presenting. So today, I will be talking about this Indian movie, but particularly with two movies, especially Jodha Akbar and Padmavat. So what I was trying to think is looking at two different movies. One is Jodha Akbar, that was produced in 2008, and another one is Padmavat, that has been produced in 2018. And I wanted to understand if there is any shift in terms of presenting Indian Muslims in Indian movies, and in what way we could explain that. So as you can see in the slide, that the first movie is Jodha Akbar, and it's a story of a Rajput prince with the Mughal Empire, the great Akbar. And the other one, that is Padmavat, that is a story of Queen Padmavati and one of the ruler of Delhi Sultanate, that is Alauddin Khilji. And as you look at the screen, you see in one movie the use of light. In Jodha Akbar, the use of light and the dressing and the representation, and the use of light and the dressing and the appearance in the Padmavat. Now, another photo could give you more clear picture about it. So now here see where at one point there is a romance scene where Akbar was spending time with his wife, and in the other one, the right one, where the Alauddin Khilji, the protagonist of Padmavat movie, one of the angry and showing that anger and the dress and the low light, and that creates a kind of aura that can that is no way could be considered as friendly, and that's very unfriendly and hostile. Now, given that two background, I thought that can you ask this question, that what had happened in between 2008 to 2018, that there is this shift where in the first place, in 2008, in one of the big budget movie, which is Jodha Akbar, Indian Muslims, especially Akbar, was presented as part of Indian identity. Whereas in 2018, one of the Muslim ruler from the past presented as an outsider, as a demon, who is outcast in the Indian identity. And of course, the easy answer is the rise of Hindu nationalism, where the Muslims and Islam started not being considered as part of solution, but started getting depicted as part of the problem. Now, I am not satisfied with that easy answer. I thought a better look could give us more about the structure and the system and the way it works, So, and what could be the best way to look at that phenomena, to understand that shift? So I would like to recall Edward S. Harman and Noam Chomsky's work on propaganda model. But then I also think that propaganda model, as it was proposed in 1998, was pretty old as well. And now, because of the new digital media and new model of advertisement, the landscape has changed. So though propaganda model could help us to explain the shift, but looking at the funding aspect, but also we need some other theoretical aspect to understand that what are the reasons behind this kind of depictions. And then the second important person could be, brought here, that is Rice and Shoemaker and their work on hierarchical model, where we can look at cinema and these depictions as well as content from different levels, like from structural level to individual level. And if we combine that to theory, we would be able to minimize the blind spot, and then we can question the producer of that cinema, the gatekeeper of those movies, as well as the content writer and the script writers and the audience. Because see, when these actors are acting in the movie, they are actually acting on the final product. But the final product, when it was in making, it involves some good number of stakeholders, and these stakeholders are actually deciding that a particular group of community or particular people, be it Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or white or black, could be represented in cinema. Now, to cut it short, so it's very easy in a way to just say that this is the bad representation, this is the good representation. But I think over the time, this is not solving the problem. But if we want to solve the problem of representation and identity politics, or at least want to deal with that, we need to look at these gatekeepers, producers, advertisers, and the content and script writers, as well as the audience. And given that, I think we can ask this question that what will it take to push Muslim representation in film? Because, and then also it's important that having more gatekeepers in industries, those who could understand these nuances of identity politics, as well as identifying the need of Muslim audience, because in the modern media structure, audience and revenue generation is one of the things that is very important. Now, revenue could come from ad, from people's viewing, as well as it could come from state. So it seems that the Muslim audience has never been explored that much. On the other hand, we need to have more Muslim writers, filmmakers, producers, and content writers who could come up and take this responsibility to challenge this Orientalist as well as demonic representation of particular community. And it's not only for the Muslims, but also Muslim representations within the Muslim community, like how Bengali Muslims represent Arab Muslims in the Bangla film, or like how Arab Muslims represent non-Arab Muslims in their own films. So the fight is not only about West versus East, it's also inside. And therefore, contextualization is very important with that regard. And finally, to conclude, what I was trying to say is that, look, there is no one way to be Muslim, as well as there is no one way to tell the stories for Muslims. And given that understanding, I think we need to step one step ahead, that instead just stopping us from identifying what is happening, also we need to question the process that is allowing to the product that is happening and coming in front of us. And I hope in the discussion session, we would be able to engage more about it. So thank you very much for bearing with me. And I'm really sorry about this screen share things. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Well, I think one issue, of course, that emerges is Muslim stereotypes about others. Other Muslims, as you said, Bengalis about Arab and so forth. That is an issue. And Muslim stereotypes about the West, about Africans. We have a history of racism and even slave trade among Muslims. So those are important issues. As we critique Islamophobia and as we critique the Western images of Islam, we also need to look at ourselves. So now we move on to Humaira.
Hi, thank you, Prof. Farid, and also the organization for having me. I would also like to thank all the previous presenters because I think at every presentation, I definitely learned something. So yeah, now I'm gonna share screen. Yeah, so this is my topic for today, the perceived tension between Islam and feminism. So before I start, this is just like the brief outline for today's presentation. I'll be going through the concept of this of hegemony of Western feminism, and followed by gender expectations, which is also linked to the interpretations of Quranic verses through patriarchal lenses. And lastly, I'll be talking more about how do we actually move forward in feminist discourses on Islam. So just a brief history of feminism. There are actually a lot more waves that emerged in even like last year or like this year. But for the interest of time, I'll just be going through the three waves. So the first wave took place in the late 19th and early 20th century, where it emerged out of an environment of urban industrialism. So for the first wave, it focused more on women's suffrage. So women's suffrage focused more on women's voting rights, where actually the first attempt to secure women's rights in voting actually took place in Seneca, New York, where women actually fought for voting rights. And then for second wave feminism, it then emerged in the 1960s. The second wave focused more on sexuality and reproductive rights, where I think in January 1973, the US Supreme Court actually legalized abortion. And that is one of the achievements of the success wave of the second wave feminism. And the third wave may be seen as a critique of the previous wave because the third wave focused more on the intersectionality of oppression and highlighted how the previous waves of feminism actually disregard, or rather did not really talk so much about women outside of the West. So yeah, this brings me to my next point about the hegemony of Western feminism. So Western feminist discourses often obscure the differences of other women, and they disregard the complexities and how the lives of the women outside of the West actually is very much influenced by their culture and history. So we really need to bring our attention to the politics of difference here. And moving on to the scholarship on Islam and feminism, past literature on the discourse of convergence of Islam and feminism first deny any possibility of convergence. So basically they see that Islam and feminism, these are just two ideas that just don't go well together. And scholars who have also written about Islam and portrayed the religion as anti-feminist assume that such consciousness of gender issues had always existed in the Muslim culture, which is not true. And then this term called Islamic feminism is a term that emerged in the 1990s. So Margaret Badran in 2005 explained how it is a feminist discourse and practice grounded in an Islamic paradigm. But converging Islam and feminism might not necessarily lead to this term called Islamic feminism, because I personally find that this term is quite problematic in the sense that it creates otherness in Muslim women's experiences. And indeed, resisting this terminology is also a form of anti-colonial politics, where it rejects any form of categorization by Western constructs. And it is definitely very important to understand Muslim histories of equality and inequality to move forward in our current feminist discourse. Yeah, so now I will move on to the patriarchal interpretations of the Quran. I mean, obviously there are a lot of points of contention, but for this interest of time, I'll just be going through a few. So yeah, Islam, as the previous presenters mentioned, Islam has always been represented as local stuff going on, which is not true. And as for feminism itself, Islam has always been misrepresented as a religion that is anti-women and restrain women in almost all aspects of life, be it political, economic, or even social spheres. However, there are evidence from Islamic texts that are supportive of women's rights. And we also have to take note that the Quran itself was also written at a particular point of Islamic history. So readers should not only, consider the rationale for those texts, but also the societies where those texts are also being interpreted and translated into their own cultural actions. Yeah, so one of the scholars also mentioned that there is indeed a huge difference between what the Quran, and in 1995, Shahid also talked about how women's concerns such as the inability to make money for them have also been addressed in the Quran itself. And yeah, and practices like two of the points of contention in interpreting the Quranic verses. So for veiling itself and how women should guard their modesty, it has been mentioned in the Quran that women should guard, one of the statements also say that they should draw their veils over their bottoms and not display their beauty. But, Ali enacted 19, and how this also is very restricting the liberty of women, but is to protect them from the uncertain conditions of Medina at that time. So there was a lot of war going on, and women and children were like the most vulnerable populations at that time. So it was a need for them to to cover themselves. But for now, if you're telling me that I should cover myself because if I go out there and I will get raped, then it will be a ridiculous it will be ridiculous to me. And also, for burqa. So for burqa has been considered by many critics of Islam as oppressing women. But what many do not know that burqa has got nothing to do with the Islamic text or Islam in general, because it just doesn't make sense. Because some even argued that if it is mandatory that women should not cover their face during pilgrimage and prayer, then it simply does not make sense for them to cover during their very normal daily activities. So even covering the face and women, it shuns women from the public sphere. So they are like pretty much invisible. So this is just a very simple example of how interpretations can translate into laws that govern women's behavior and attire. So I'll just go through the last part of this interpretation. So in Surah An-Nisa also, they say that to men is allotted what they earn and to women what they earn. This means that both men and women can earn an income for themselves. So if women, it has to be excluded from economic sphere, it has got nothing to do with whether it's religious or not. It's had got to do with the interpretations of those texts. So how do we move forward then is I feel that we must understand that it is because of women's exclusion from religion from the past that has led to the dominance of patriarchal interpretations of the Quran. So women were excluded from the academic sphere, from the intellectual work of trying to interpret the Quran. And also the reinterpretation of those texts from a feminist perspective is indeed a continuing intellectual work. So to move forward, I feel that conversations about Islam and feminism must first begin by talking about the history of Islam, to understand how this sexist discourses does not reflect so much about the religion, but it reflects about the society. Yeah. And that is all from me. Thank you so much.
Okay, Humaira, thank you. There's not much time to talk about these issues. It's certainly Islamic feminism is, it's a big issue, and unfortunately, feminism is still very much, it's generally not accepted in Muslim societies, which I think is a pity. So you should continue the discussion. In fact, I would say you should do your honors thesis on it. Okay, we can talk later. Yeah. All right. So we move to Ms. Noura Jukaku right now.
Hello, everyone. Noura. Good evening. Okay, so this is a really last-minute thing, and I'm sorry I have to wear my mask because I'm at a public place. So my topic, hijab, a form of oppression for Muslim women. Why I thought this would be a topic to discuss is because many a times we see Muslim women being shown as oppressed, or Islam oppresses Muslim women. And no doubt that this might be present in Muslim societies, but I think we should look at it at a point of what Islam says about women. So the topic hijab is a very controversial thing, which shows that, if somebody does it from the Muslim woman, that means they're oppressed by the male members of their family. And to go really quickly over it, I think what we need to understand more is what is hijab and why do Muslim women cover at the first place. So hijab, it's an Arabic word. It means covering or barrier. But if you see in the Quran, I think a more appropriate word for it would be khimar, which is a head covering, where the lady can open her face, open her hands. But generally, she has to be covered from the male members who are not from the family, or mahram as they're called. So why do Muslim women cover? I think it's more because a Muslim woman, generally, we think that we want to have a connection with God. And because we believe that the main source of Islam is the Quran and the prophetic tradition, I think that would be a much more better explanation than just the general thing that it's because the male members of the family are pressing on the Muslim woman. So if we look at the traditional text, because I think everything has a source, everything has an evidence. So if we look at the Quranic text, it shows that the Muslim women, they do this out of modesty, and also to protect something that can be evil for her outside of her home. Like we said, even though at the time of Medina, maybe they had war, or maybe they had rape or molestation, those things have still not changed in today's society. We still see this, especially the country that I'm from in India. We see this happening maybe every few seconds. So we need to also look at what is the reason behind the Muslim woman covering. The basic source of the Quran, like I said, it mentions khimar. Which is the head covering. Now, what is the sources of these things, and what is the basic conditions? Like we see in the Muslim societies, you will see women differently doing their hijab. For example, if I wear black, it does not necessarily mean that women from Indonesia will wear the same thing. So it's not a specific color, or it's not a specific dress code, but rather the condition is that the woman fulfills the condition of modesty, and she does not show something that is attractive to the opposite gender. So this is a very small thing about what is hijab and why do we cover. Now coming to the question of, is it oppression? Generally, if you look at liberal societies or progressive societies, you will see that people who say that the hijab is oppression is not generally the Muslim woman. Rather, you will see that these people are male or somebody outside of the Muslim society, which they feel that hijab is an oppression for Muslim women. But I would probably like to end with the question that in liberal societies, if women are allowed to wear what they want, then why is the Muslim woman being banned, for example, in France or many parts of Europe, to dress the way she likes? So if, rather than asking the question, is it really oppression? We need to ask, who are the people that are saying that this is an oppression? So I think I would like to end there, because I was called in half an hour ago, so I could not prepare much. But I think we need to really ask these questions, and we need to look into it in the context of what the sources say, and is it really oppression to a Muslim woman herself who chooses to do hijab?
Thank you very much, Noura, and appreciate you doing this at short notice. And I'm sure some of the issues you raised will be we'll get back to later, which will be soon. We have our last but not least important presentation by Mustafa. Yes, Mustafa.
So my presentation is about a story in Iran, and before that I want to congratulate everyone. Today is the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad in Iran, according to the Shiite calendar. First, I want to give you a very brief information that justifies my presentation. This is the demographic religious population in Iran. We have 98% of Muslims and 2% of other religions, including Christianity, Jews, Zoroastrians, Yazidis, and some other minorities. So it's very, so this is because I want to say that Iran is not a religiously diverse society. So we cannot talk about the cross-communal dialogues, but we have to rather talk about inter-communal dialogue. So the mandatory hijab started in 1979, just a few months after the revolution. First, the first rule was to avoid women without hijab to enter the governmental spaces. Then the second rule was to make it mandatory for every woman to wear hijab in every public space outside houses. And the early representation of these women who were also active in the revolution. See, in the revolution, before the revolution, in all these demonstrations, women with hijab and women without hijab were both present. So early representation is showing women with hijab as an activist, aware, independent, and at the same time spiritual. The photo is from a very famous war film, Travel to Chazabe or Safar be Chazabe. I may say intellectual response to this image was showing women with hijab as backward, passive, family-oriented, or even family-dominated and supportive. There was this balance was there always in the society. I mean, women who were not believing in hijab, showing their disagreement with a kind of improper hijab, which was accepted in the society, but not in the media and not in the cinema. In 2007, Iranian police started a new project called the Improvement of Social Security, or as we call it, Gasht-e Irshad. And they started arresting women without hijab, and so on the other hand, this fine balance was no more existed. More radical responses to this project was started by the opposition and people who were not believing in hijab. And even among hijab believers, men and women, people started showing disagreement with this new project because they had to get permission to be on a screen, did not support the social opposition to this project. And when they showed the disagreement, it was more like a marketing strategy to get the attention, to grab the attention, to grab the public attention for their products. But at the same time, the government kind of overlooked their very special lifestyle, their very luxurious and special lifestyle, which did not match the government standards. We have more than 50% of university students in the last 2 decades. Now we have this kind of middle class, modest, well-educated women in the society who are finding their own way of Islam and their own style of Islam, which includes participating in social activities, which includes kind of independence and a more equal rights with men in their personal lives, in their families. Daughters of Revolution Street, it happened in 2017. Vida Mowahed started this movement. As you can see, the top left photo is her photo uncovering her head and making a flag out of his scarf. She became extremely popular and people started doing it again and again. And this was the government response. they made these stations in a way that no one can stand on them. And people with hijab started doing it again, sympathizing with them, with Daughters of Revolution Street. And then the new debate started, emphasizing on the historical facts about having mandatory hijab in the early history of Islam, about not having mandatory hijab in the early history of Islam, emphasizing on the advices given by social scientists rather than security agents, and depoliticalizing hijab, trying to convince the government to depoliticalize hijab, urging government to prevent the social gaps that can happen later, and making discriminations against women with hijab in the society, in the shopping malls, in the public spaces, not non-governmental public spaces. The cinematic encounter happens in so many films in the last few years. One of them is this film called Sweet, which depicts the woman with hijab as a representative of the government who is hostile, harsh, and having a very luxurious lifestyle against women who are talented, lonely, and not supported by the living in hijab and banned from social rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. You know, I think your presentation reminds us of the importance of women's agency when it comes to these issues. We were originally going to have a session after this where the presenters talk among themselves and then open it up to a general discussion. But because we're a little late and you know, it's almost 8:30 and we have till 9 o'clock. With Professor Liu's permission, I was thinking that we may go straight to the general discussion, and of course the presenters will be part of that, and you know, they are free to you know, to make any interventions. Is that okay, Joyce? You think we can do
Perfect.
that?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, great. And also with your permission, let me just kickstart the discussion with something provocative. You know, we've been talking a lot about hijab, not only in this session, but also previously. Of course, it is true that hijab is neither oppressive nor liberating. It can be oppressive and it can be liberating. There are circumstances where it is liberating and there are circumstances where it's very oppressive. So we have to understand those nuances. But I think what is very important to point out, and I frequently come across this in many Muslim countries, we ought not to blame women for the way they dress. We ought not to blame crimes against women on the way they dress. This, I think, is very, very wrong. And it's also an unsound argument. You see, for example, there was an imam in Malaysia, or well, I can't remember, he was a religious leader. He said, and this is quite a common view among religious leaders, that the reason for rape and sexual crimes against women has to do with their not using hijab. Now, this is simply a wrong idea. In fact, in the sociological literature, it's called the rape myth, that rape has got to do with the sexually provocative nature of women, that if a woman dresses in a sexually provocative manner, she is more open to rape and sexual crime. But this is not true. Old women get raped. Infants get raped. It has not to do with the sexually provocative nature of a particular woman, how she's dressed and how she carries herself and so on. In fact, there's even an argument that the more sexually provocative a woman is, the less likely she is to get raped, because the rapist is intimidated by such women. rape is about power, and the rapist avoids women who intimidate him. So this rape myth, I think, is something that comes from the recognition of this rape myth is a result of understanding rape and how it happens in society. And if a religious leader is going to make a comment about connecting rape with the way women dress, he should first read the sociological and psychological literature on this. If he's not familiar with the literature, then he ends up saying ridiculous things, because there's simply no evidence that rape has to do with the way a woman looks, whether she's beautiful or not beautiful, whether she's dressed modestly or dressed immodestly. It has nothing to do with that. And I think it's a very dangerous argument, because it's blaming sexual crimes against women on women themselves, blaming the victims. So I think this example shows how we are not really qualified to talk about many things concerning Islam and Muslims unless we have exposure to the social scientific literature. It is not enough to have the textual understanding of Islam. It's not enough to have the legalistic understanding of Islam. The social scientific understanding is also very important. So with that, with raising that critical point, let's have a discussion. Yes, Noura.
Okay, so I think I completely agree with Professor Farid where he says that women are not to be blamed for such issues. But the country where I come from, if you see India, there's many social experiments that have happened where men show more tendency to go for women who are maybe half-dressed. Obviously not to say that, women are the reason. But if you see the Islamic context, there's one more thing I think I missed to mention. There's also hijab for men. So in the Quran, if we see, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells males to have a hijab, which is not to look at women in that manner. So when they look at a woman, even the look should be with the respect. So I think that's also worthy of being mentioned here. Also, whether hijab liberalizes or sort of oppresses, I think it mainly depends. There's an ayah that says that La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion. So obviously women can also not be forced to wear the hijab. It has to come from within. It has to be her choice. So I think these 2 points needed to be mentioned here. Thank you so much.
Yes, Asif.
Thank you, Professor. I would just pass a comment, and I initially thought the comment would be about your point as well, but I would like to add one small comment for Noura's point as well. So the rape culture in India, I was living in India since 2014, and we had this discussion about it a lot. And there is a very interesting work done by a journalist from CNN. And she interviewed almost like 15 rapists who were locked in the jail, in Indian jails, and she managed the access. And she revealed this thing, that this idea that short dress provokes rape is a kind of self-making myth, even in Indian context. Because while she was looking at the data that rape happened from 2018 to 2020, and while she was interviewing these people, and then while she put the data in one side and the interview data from other, the empirical evidence shows that there is no clear link between the short dress and the rapist's intention to rape the victim. Now, that is a statistically significant data that we can't deny. And hence, I believe there is more room to question these narratives that dress could prevent people from getting raped, especially in today's context. And with that note, as Professor was mentioning that as you have mentioned about the agency question, and just to add a point with that, right nowadays, I feel that maybe as Muslim, I personally identify myself as a Muslim as well as I'm a critical Muslim. So I think that we as a Muslim, be it in the scholarly circle or be in the public sphere, we haven't dealt with the woman question properly. We always dealt with the woman question from the perspective of a powerful male sitting in the privileged position and making the judgment about others. So, and over the time, we have imposed our agency over these, women gender. Now, these us, I'm like defining in a way that it's not only male. In some context, in case of Bangladesh, which has a very progressive record about women, this group is not only constituted by male, but also female, that they decide what to do for other women and what not to do other women. This setting the standard and enforcing it by using several means like coercive as well as non-coercive means is something stopping us to recognize that we haven't successfully dealt, or maybe we don't want to deal with the woman question. And hence, whenever the woman question comes in the discussion, we always guess that what France did, that's a France problem. But what I did or what a Bangladesh did with its own citizen, that's a Bangladesh problem. And we need to have these different segments. And that's the point I wanted to add, actually. Thank you very much.
I feel there are some kind of mixing between two things, the culture and the Islamic teaching. So sometimes teaching, for example, back home, I can give an example, like divorced women, it will be really hard for her to remarry or something like this. This is not Islamic teaching, but it's really a culture. But sometimes somebody coming from outside and he see this circumstances or this environment, he's starting mixing between the culture itself and the religion teaching itself. So basically the religion, usually you need to go back to resources. What is the resources, like what is Quran is saying and what is the Sunnah is saying, the teaching of Messenger Muhammad. So usually this, you need really to refer to a scholar who have really a good knowledge to get feedback about what should be done or what is not acceptable. And of course, you are not limited to one source of the, like one scholar, because one scholar maybe says something, maybe another scholar says something else. So it's really very clear in Islamic, like nobody from Muslims will come and tell you eating pork is allowed. And there are some other topics is really much more open, and Islam is really opening the window over there. Now, the second topic or a comment I want to mention, Islam is a kind of balance, and it's really a message of mercy, message of justice, and so on. And this message is not coming from a human, from me as a Muslim, it's coming from God who created all of us. And he already gave us resources and the example of Messenger Muhammad. So this is really, sometimes even for Muslims, I ask them to please go and study very well and understand the situation before you make any comment, because sometimes you are lacking some information from history or certain situation. So your interpretation or understanding of the situation or the ruling of Islam is really mixed up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just add that, just to make it a little bit more complicated, it's not just the distinction between Islamic teachings on the one hand and culture on the other, because many Islamic teachings themselves reflect culture. So niqab, for example, and I would even argue hijab reflects culture. So it's not as it's not always so clear cut or black and white, and that's what makes the diversity very great and also very interesting, but also contentious and contradictory and conflictual in our societies. Over to Bilal.
Okay, thank you. I just simply want to make a comment. The problem with the ulama is that they basically get trained in a particular environment, okay, in particular conditions. They spend 10-15 years in madrasas, okay, they don't have the the experience, the exposure to the living reality. Okay, so they miss the context. So there is a problem when they interpret the text. And in this particular case, when it comes to do women who wear short clothes, half clothes, like, does it provocate men to go for the rape? Here they don't even have the they don't support this argument that it is because of the woman wearing short dresses that is provocative. It's here they fail to get a text. They don't have the text in support of their argument. So what they do, they use their own logic, and we have to understand their logic is not it has not got exposure to the external environment, the living reality. Okay, so their logic it develops in the four walls of the madrasa, their rationality. Okay, they understand the text and how they interpret the text, and how they use their own intellect, their own aql in the interpretation process. So it is within the four walls of the madrasa or the masjid. They don't have the the contact with the living reality, the society. Okay, so in this case, what they do is say they simply come with this logic, with this rationality. Since women wear clothes which are very kind of seductive, which are very attractive, and this is the reason for the rape. They don't support the argument within text because they don't have the text to support it. So it's their own rationality, but it's a problematic rationality again, because this is a rationality disconnected from the reality. The reality is different. They don't go into the society. They don't understand the society, the psychology, and the sociological literature, as was rightly put by Professor Farid Al-Attas. So it's not something that comes from the text itself, like that this is the growth in the rape is because that women are wearing kind of clothes which is very provocative. It's very wrong mentality. It's basically
I think Bilal, I think you are right, and I think part of the problem is that the scholars of the past, they were scholars who had a broad access and exposure to knowledge. For example, Ibn Khaldun was a jurist, but he was also an historian. He was also a sociologist. So he understood all these connections. But today, the knowledge of the so-called ulama has become very narrow. So they are not really people of the world. They don't really understand the world. They don't understand modernity. So they come up with very ridiculous fatwas that are meant to deal with modern problems, but they're not able to deal with modern problems, because the modern social sciences and the modern knowledge is not part of their, it's not within their radar, because they consider these fields as secular knowledge and inferior forms of knowledge. So it refers, I think, to a crisis in knowledge among the ulama. Yes, Farooq.
Okay, sir, my question is from you. That dress is man's personal choice, men and women personal choice. So in Europe and America, Muslims are going to be considered ridiculous because of their dress, like in France, which is a negative effect of the Western media. What can be done to eliminate this narrative from the Western media, because Muslims are facing prejudice everywhere due to this?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking from you, sir.
Thank you. I don't really want to take too much time with this, because this is meant for a general discussion. But let me just very quickly say, I think the way Muslims need to deal with prejudice against them is through their conduct. It's pointless to, it's not enough to refer to the text. We need to demonstrate that we live according to the values that are expressed by our texts, by our holy text, by the example and sayings of our Prophet. It's not enough to refer to that. We have to actually live by that, and it means also that we need to be able to integrate to some extent. So if you insist on the right to use niqab, then I'm afraid you are creating unnecessary problems. Although I don't towards hijab, I don't agree with the Swiss. At some point, I think it was in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken, they banned the minarets or a certain type of architecture which expressed an Islamic aesthetic. I don't agree with these things, but Muslims have to meet them halfway by not insisting on things that offend the Europeans. After all, the Europeans have opened their borders. They have taken in millions of hundreds of thousands of Muslims who over the years now constitute millions of people in Europe. So I think it is right to think of a form of Euro-Islam. The culture of the Muslims cannot be the same in Europe as it is in in India and Pakistan or in other parts of the Muslim world. But that's just a short answer to your question. Thank you, Dr. Farooq.
Okay, sir. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now to you, over to you, Noor.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes.
So I wanted to have a quick, because of course, we agree to disagree. Of course, you have opinion, I have opinion. We agree to disagree. So, like Professor and others said, we should not be confined to four walls of madrasa. And like Professor said, a scholar should be well read in different sciences. I agree with that. For example, I give example of Ibn Hazm, who was a polymath. He was a philosopher, he was a logician, he was a poet, and he was an Islamic legal scholar, and on and on, polymath. People can read about him. So about this issue of Ibn Hazm, there are, even these Islamic scholars, many of them are against him. But he is quoted as an authority in issue of ijma. He has a book called Maratib al-Ijma. In that, Ibn Hazm says the scholars of the East and West unanimously agree, meaning not a single scholar disagree, that hijab is to cover the entire hair. And this is not a custom, rather it's a commandment, clearly, explicitly mentioned in the Quran, in chapter 33, in chapter 24, in different various places. So I vehemently disagree with the idea that it's culture. No, rather it's Quran, Sunnah, and unanimous agreement of Muslim scholars. Even I say, even Ibn Khaldun, even he did not disagree with it. And if somebody says he did, then please provide evidence. So this is the first point. And the second point I wanted to say about, about statistically significant. Somebody spoke about statistically significant, some data in India. This is, when you say statistically significant, you should apply some test. For example, one-way ANOVA or unpaid test, and then you come to statistical analysis and they say statistically significant. Because even I came across many statistics and social experiments where, the provocative dress did attract, and I'm not blaming women for this. Be very clear, I'm not blaming women for any kind of social experiments, in contrary to what some social experiments the brother has quoted. So to say that it can be socially significant is a big thing. There may be disagreement. One research may say that, other may say that. So yeah. And to conclude, when I say Islam, of course you have so many understanding, like Professor has quoted, like people have, of course there are traditional Islam. Traditional means when I say Prophet Muhammad, when he spoke, he explained Quran, the Sahaba, the Tabi'in, the Atba' Tabi'in, and the scholars of Islam throughout the time, throughout 10 centuries, 14 centuries, they have one understanding. And then there's a Mu'tazili understanding, which is a rational school of thought, which many people follow. I have no problem with that. Many modernist Mu'tazili, like modern day Mu'tazili, they have their own understanding, and I'm not against, they are free to do so. But yes, they should say that, okay, this is a fringe minority opinion, and the mainstream majority scholarly tradition, and they have sociologists, scientists, and legal scholars who agree unanimously that hijab is a part of Islam, not a culture. Yeah, this is my, conclusion.
Yes, thank you, Noor, for your points. I can only say that we are not followers of Ibn Hazm. So just because he says that, it doesn't mean that we ought to follow that. And I think a lot of people will argue that the Quran does not mention the hair. This is an interpretation. No doubt it's a dominant interpretation. I agree with that. With regard to research on rape, I'm not talking about social experiments. I'm talking about research done over decades by by scholars, particularly people in the field of sociology, social work, social and psychology. We're not talking about social experiments. The argument you have to realize. See, the argument is a very dangerous argument. It's a very anti-woman argument. You see, it's quite apart from the issue of modesty. I don't agree that women should come to campus and go to the shopping center with bikini. I don't agree. It's not modest. And I don't agree that men should be using shorts and going to campus either, although they do. To me, that's not modest. But when I was a kid, I was not allowed to take public transport or bus with my running shorts. This was my father's view. He did not distinguish between me and my sisters when it came to modesty. But even if we agree that a certain dress is immodest, that using a bikini in classroom is immodest, let us say we agree it is immodest, it is a different matter to say that modesty leads to rape, or leads to sexual harassment, or leads to sexual crimes. This is very insulting to women. And it's simply not true in terms of the data and the logic, because what is known in rape, and this is where the ulama, I think, are weak, what it is known about rape is that it's not about sexual desire. Rape is not about sexual desire. It's about power. Therefore, it has not to do with the way women look. So one is not qualified to talk about it as the ulama do unless you know the literature. It's simply inadequate to know the textual material on dress and hijab and all that. When you are linking that to what is happening in society, but you don't know the literature about what's happening in society. In this case, we're talking about sociological literature. You see, this is my point.
I agree with you.
Please, could I say a few words? Yes, I think this is a Muslim, non-Muslim dialogue. I do not want it to be dominated within Muslims and male audience. I do want to hear more voices.
Sorry, Joyce.
No.
Sorry, Joyce,
I think here
right.
people are relying on certain authorities to judge or to define or to whatever. I have just two observations. One is that from the very early on in history, Muslim scholars, intellectuals, they were open-minded, and scientists, they discovered many things. They talked about equality in the community and equal, like socialist management. They respect people on equal terms. And also, there were, as I said, Sufi female Sufi practices, right? In the early on.
Yes.
Right. So and also women leaders in different Muslim communities. But as you also mentioned, and people here also mentioned that it's mostly dominated by the patriarchal society and male interpretation, so that female voices were silenced in history. So, but now, right, we should really allow or encourage or really listen to more women interpretation of Quran and so on. And the other thing, final, is that history is full of contingency. For example, Iran, there were so many artists, film directors, and women were so open-minded. But after this Iranian revolution, they became very much suppressed, silenced, I think. not to mention what's happening in Afghanistan. So yeah, I think in order to really make this Islam religion living, then we need to open up for all different voices and interpretation, so that they can really address contemporary societies and not refer back to authority.
Yes,
go back to you.
Thank you, Joyce. Thanks also for reminding us that it's a dialogue between Muslims and non-Muslims, especially. I saw Bilal's hand. Is that from the previous round, or do you want to say something, Bilal?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a comment.
Yeah.
Basically, you know what? When we say that ulama are not trained, we don't mean to say that they should be, you know, they should hold expertise in all subjects. Like they don't need to be polymaths as they were in one period of the history, you know. But they can be, you know, there can be the specialization. You know? I mean, one alim can be, I mean, specialized in one particular field of fiqh. Okay, so he becomes relevant to that subject. We don't demand them to become, you know, sociologists, psychologists, and scientists, and ulama at the same time. This is not possible, you know. This is very much ridiculous. If somebody demands that ulama should, you know, have the knowledge of everything, that's not possible. But yeah, what they can do, you know, to make themselves relevant to the discourse, they can be, you know, I mean, they can be very selective about their subject knowledge, you know. They can choose one particular subject, get trained in that subject, you know, and develop expertise in that particular subject. So they are masters of that particular subject. You know, it's not necessary to become, I mean, master of everything. We don't demand that. You know, we don't have that obsession. This is a problem with the ulama. They don't know this and they don't know that. So there should be the ulama who can do, I mean, who can be, I mean, equally, I mean, knowledgeable in all subjects. That is not possible, and that's not relevant. Something wrong. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. That's a relevant point. We have Ong Ziken.
So thanks, my professor, for giving me the floor to ask a question. And so actually we have been talking about the rape myth, and also that short dressing is not a reason why people will rape that woman. But then I can see that a lot of people are not willing to accept this. And may I ask, what is the reason behind, even though there are so many theories or facts that debunk the rape myth?
Well, you know, I don't think we want to spend too much time on this, but let me just say that actually a lot of people do accept this. It is just that we're speaking about certain kinds of religious leaders who are sort of alienated from life, from what's happening on the ground. But if you ask many Muslim women, they would feel quite insulted when it's suggested to them that a sexual crime is committed against them, you know, whether it is harassment or rape or in any other form, because of the way they dress. You know, they themselves know intuitively that there's something wrong with that logic. So, but we can, you know, perhaps take this offline and talk about it more. Asif, you had your hand up?
Yes, yes, I have my hand up, but it's about Professor Joy's comments, actually. I was also really looking forward to listen about the intercommunal dialogue instead of fighting about, you know, data and significance. So the point is, I think this dialogue is very important. It was important in the past as well as it is important today. And it is important today more because, you know, in past, like even like 50 years ago, people were only limited in the 50 kilometers of his living area. Like 60 years ago in 1950s, some social science studies says that people used to live with where they were born and then within the 50 kilometers because of the communication and everything. And right now, just look at the screen. We have people from half of the world
sitting from 4 different time zones and talking. Now, when we are talking about the regular things, which is very good, fine. But the very moment when it comes to the question of collaboration, cooperation, and understanding each other, then all of a sudden, all this comes in the first place. Whereas we are supposed to sit together and open and question what are the barriers that is stopping us to empathize for each other. Yes, it's true. There are conflicting histories between Muslim and non-Muslims in terms of power. You can, question Europeans for taking over the Muslim empires. But then also, apart from that, there are examples where Muslims and non-Muslims came together and collaborated and solved the problem and put forward the civilizational journey for the progress of humanity. And that we can see in the past. When we talk about Ibn Sina or others, we see they worked on the work that has been produced in the earlier civilizations, such as Aristotle and Plato. And then when we look at the 13th century Renaissance, we see Muslim thinkers' work have been referred and used in medical science, in painting, and in literature. But now, what actually happened, that now it's all about which one is the Muslim name and which one is the non-Muslim name. If it is Muslim name, I have to own it. And if it is a non-Muslim name, I have to defend that your knowledge is coming from my past. But human knowledge doesn't work in that way. It works collaboratively. It's not based on your religious identity, because God is Rahim before it's Rahman. So it's for everyone, and therefore the knowledge has been given to everyone. Now, I think my point is that I don't want to extend it more, is that right now, yes, of course, we can have a lot of debate about this compartmentalization of knowledge and the power and prestige and privilege of a patriarchal society and its privileged group. But at the same time, I think it's also important for us to find out ways to collaborate and cooperate, where we can sit together and maybe over a cup of tea, which is permissible for Jewish, for Christians, for Muslims, and for a Chinese, a Taiwanese, a Bengali, a Indian, a Pakistani, and could have the chat, simple chat. How was your day? Maybe that could be our early start before going so deep into all those complex matters. So my point to all my friends and colleagues who participated in it, maybe at some point, of course, problematization is important. Fight over data is important. But the most important thing is that taking forward the civilizational responsibility we have in our shoulder and working together to help humanity to solve the problem, be it male or female. So that's the point I wanted to add, actually. That's all. I have no question with that.
Thank you, Asif, for your reminder on those issues, and also bringing this back to dialogue. So I actually want to ask my friend and colleague is in our group, who's extremely active in the area of dialogue, interreligious dialogue in Singapore and to some extent in Malaysia, and he has a lot of experience, and I'm sure he can share something with us, if briefly. Imran, can you join us?
Yeah, salam. Yeah, I'm not sure what am I supposed to comment, Prof.
Whatever you like. It's a dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I find the discussion fascinating. I think this is where it's important to also reflect on the idea that when we talk about cross-cultural issues, there's a lot of intersection with intra-Muslim issues also that has to be sorted out. I get a bit uncomfortable when we often share Islam in a very normative way, like, oh, Islam says this, Islam says that, when actually we come from a very subjective standpoint based on our ideas, our interpretation. And that is why in any kind of cross-cultural or interfaith setting or dialogue, it's important to emphasize that we are speaking from our own individual standpoint instead of representing 2 billion Muslims in the world, saying that Islam says this and that. But of course, there is that element of core or essence that provides the stability of Islam, and that happens to be quite few in numbers. For example, the idea of the oneness of God or Tawhid, nobody will dispute that and say, if you have a different idea of Tawhid and say God is more than one, then of course that does not fall into Islam. Or the idea that Quran is a divine word of God, or Muhammad being the messenger of God. But beyond that, I think we can make a distinction between what are the fundamentals and what are the branches of faith where the ulama disagree. And that is because non-Muslims will not be able to understand some of the nuances sometimes. And it's important as interlocutors from the Muslim side also not to represent issues that are quite diverse and contested into one single framing, as though that there is only a single homogeneous Islam. So that is the problem that I often see in interfaith dialogue, where interlocutors present Islam in a very monolithic way, in a timeless way, as though that there are no discussions or contentions on many of these issues. And we have seen how it panned out in the earlier discussion over hijab and ideas on women.
Very, very briefly, Imran, could you say something about your experience about the obstacles on the other side, on the side of non-Muslims whom we are dialoguing with? What do you feel might be some of the problems?
Well, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but it really depends. And I mean, it's really contextual also, because each society will have different experiences of how they interact with Muslims, and that shapes their ideas and opinions, right? So sometimes it's shaped by, I think the fundamental issue is the tendency to generalize. And that happens on both sides, including how we caricature the West, is also how the West also caricatures Muslim societies and communities and cultures.
Yeah.
And this idea that there is no intersection at all, as though that these are two essentialized, it's a very Orientalist view, which unfortunately the Muslims also imbibe in the way we look at other societies, that societies can be reduced to very essentialized traits. They are unchanging, they're static, and everyone that is being categorized being part of that society therefore must share certain characteristics that are fixed. Yeah. So that happens to be the problem on both sides, actually, and that hampers dialogue, because then we would speak about the other in a very generalized way. Oh, the Muslims, they are like this, A, B, C, D. And that's how the Muslims also speak about other societies, that and the way they depict the West as being atheistic, secular, immoral, and I think this mirror image is what emerged out of that post-colonial situation, where Muslims feel that they need to assert a certain kind of exclusive identity in relation to how the West has depicted Muslim societies over the colonial period. So we are still living in that problem, that baggage. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think we can always give examples from many Muslims' attitude towards Judaism, where you have a lot of anti-Jewish ideas and Judaism, about Hindus. You have a lot of Christian bashing. The whole of Christianity is reduced to to evangelical Christianity, for example. So points well taken, Imran. Thank you very much.
Thanks, bro.
Joyce, I think we are running over time, right?
Yes, but I hate to just stop here. Maybe let's extend for another 15 minutes.
Sure.
To let those hands speak up.
Yeah, and then okay, first. Yeah. Abi and Mustafa.
Yeah. What I want to comment generally about the whole discussion which I audited today is that it's really wonderful how hijab, I'm talking about hijab again because most of the conversation was about hijab, so but excuse me about this. So it's very really wonderful how it has different stories in different Muslim countries. In some places, there is no issue about it. Everything just happens so softly. I mean, as I see it, maybe it's not true. Maybe it's just it just appears from where I stand. But I think in East Asian countries, it was less problematic than Middle East, and especially Iran. And I don't know why it has become such a political issue in my country and in some countries around in the Middle East. And I want to add that it looks to me that it's more about the dignity than anything else. It's about a lifestyle, a selective lifestyle for women, and of course it has some political aspects in it, but I really want everybody to share their view about this problem.
Thank you, Mustafa. Even though you brought us back to hijab, I think very valid points. Okay, we move on to Adib and then Malika.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to talk a little bit, come back a little bit to Asif's presentation. I thought that the point that he made about power, I think is a point that's worth discussing in the context of film. And in relation to this theme of cross-cultural communication, one of the things that is often ignored, I think, Asif, this is what you're getting at, is that film is actually, it's not a direct process. It's not like you have where a painter just depicts something immediately, but there are all sorts of layers and power structures. This is true of art more generally, but it's particularly true of film. And really, if we want to foster cross-cultural communication, we have to take that power factor into account, because very often, especially in the context of, let's say, Hollywood, films are limited to the interests of an elite. I think Prof probably will have more to say about this, the role of elites, where the elite has their own interests. And it's not necessarily that they have any particular agenda, they're against Islam or against, it's just, it has to do with money and how the commercial motivation. So this is really where the role of independent films comes into play, because you see diversity. I mean, at least in most of the films in my presentation, I'm just using my presentation because that's what people have seen. If you look, the only film that was a major blockbuster was the first one, The Message. Everything after that is a documentary, because documentaries allow you to get an authentic voice from the subject. That the object becomes a subject. They are the ones giving their, they're the ones presenting their own views, regardless of whether they're Muslim or not. And I think it's like, I think Asif, Imran may have mentioned this as well, that, this is the sense I got. We don't want to present something in rose-tinted glasses. There are conflicts between communities, interreligious conflicts, and also within the Muslim community. So if you look at the film Blessed Are the Strangers, which I referenced earlier, so the film on the Ornaments of Lhasa dealt with the harmony between the Muslims and the Buddhists. But if you look Blessed Are the Strangers, it deals with how you have a community of white Muslim hippies, and you have a community of black Muslim activists who have to get in together within this one space and interact with each other. And there's this theme of racism and how do, within a Muslim community, how to deal with race. And it's in the context of the UK, but it's particularly true in all Muslim societies, and especially in let's say in Malaysia, for instance. There's this idea of, Malayness and being a Muslim. And if you're someone who's, let's say, a Chinese Muslim who becomes Muslim in Malaysia, what are the kinds of conflicts that you have to go through? So, but the only way really to represent that, not the only way, but the way that it's easiest to represent that, and there's more freedom in terms of power, is a documentary film. Because a documentary can be made almost without a budget. I mean, usually, ideally you would have a budget, but you can make it without those strings of somebody from the top telling you what to do. People assume the director is always the person who decides what happens. It's not. You have executive producers, there's a whole power structure that goes on. And so in the case of, let's say, the film The Message that I mentioned with Tafakkur, he struggled a lot to get that film out. He struggled, obviously Hollywood backing is very difficult, but he struggled getting influence from Muslim backers. He was actually excluded, and he was initially backed by the Moroccan government, and the Saudi government and a lot of Muslim countries threatened to boycott Morocco. And so Morocco had to pull out and Libya had to step in. So there were a lot of problems in the production process. But I think the main point I'm making is that if we want to talk about cross-cultural communication, then we really have to deal with the issue of power and empowering, empowering filmmakers to be able to tell those stories and then to market them. So we have in the last decade or so, especially with the rise of the internet, distribution has changed in nature. That you have, there's the possibility of uploading a film entirely for free online. If you feel that you can do so, and then it reaches a wider audience. Or you have, streaming platforms like Alchemia. This is not a promotion for Alchemia, but streaming platforms like Alchemia that specifically showcase Muslim filmmakers and which are not propaganda films. We don't want to get into a propagandistic mode. Oh, Islam is this and that. No, it tells honest stories by Muslim filmmakers telling stories in an honest way. And but the point I'm making is the reason why perceptions can change now is because the power balance in distribution has shifted. You don't have to rely on a cinema. You can actually rely on an open platform. That's a kind of a comment, but I think it's an important point to put out there. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Those are very interesting. But it started me to think about, since you raised the issue of film and the shift in the distribution, the balance, and cross-cultural communication.
Yeah.
I realized that we are in we are in Southeast Asia ourselves, and this film festival is being organized in Taiwan, in East Asia. But we've been talking about Bollywood, and we've been talking mainly about Hollywood and to some extent Bollywood, but we haven't talked about how Islam is present, or if not, is it absent in the movie industries in East Asia, in China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and not to mention Japan and Korea. We haven't talked about that, and we have a lot of audience from this part of the world. So maybe they can somebody can address that issue. But before that, we need to go to Malika. Yes, Malika.
Oh. Assalamualaikum. Me again. So actually, I just want to share a little bit comment here. I read the title. It's the cross-local dialogues among Muslim and non-Muslim. So I actually expected more non-Muslim, but so far I've heard a lot of the inner discussion. But I just want to share a small story, my own story. I'm a revert, so I worked in film industry before. And what brought me to Islam is actually the film I was working is about terrorists. So my job is to research what the terrorist is like. I was working in the costume design department. So, and then I started to do more research about what the terrorism is like and what terrorists in different regions. And then it has a very strong stereotype, like the terrorists should say Allahu Akbar during the whole story. And then they speak Arabic. They have a lot of, like the director wanted to present a certain way to say, okay, terrorist is like that. And then the Arab words is like that. But the thing is, the more I search, the more I started to understand. And because I'm a Muslim, and then I faced many questions like why did you choose Islam? What brought you to Islam? And then like what life changes, like what changed in my life. etc. So, and then I started to search more medias because, like I said, I work in film industry, so I have to go search media things. And then I realized there's a lot of stereotype and then a lot of prejudice, which made me think as a filmmaker how we can tell the story, how we can prevent Islam in the more appropriate way. You know what I mean? So I just want to share this small story. Yeah.
Thank you, Malika. That's really very interesting. I wish we had more, time to hear such stories. Maybe we can, organize something in the future.
Thanks for the comment about making documentary and so on. But actually, nowadays, for the modern life and something like this, people will really not to learn about Islam or something like this. It really need to be somebody really dig for the truth, or somebody have really good experience, or somebody like Malika just mentioned right now. This is really very good experience. Actually, sometimes even for me as a Muslim, I will judge some stuff because of my education, my background, and something like this. But when somebody just become a Muslim or get exposure, it's really different story, because their perspective, their concern, it will be totally different. Because here, like, I can see like some people like define Islam is supporting hijab. Some people say Islam is not supporting hijab. It's like different opinion. But somebody from outside is really different picture, and yeah, and personal experience is really something very good. So it really needs somebody to share this experience and come again and again to learn and make the people have more tolerance and more understanding for each other. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is, of course, what film does, and what other literary forms do. They bring experience. And that's why I was saying, we need to not just be preoccupied with text, but also experience. And you do that through the social sciences, and even more effectively, I think, through the arts. So, for example, when non-Muslims want to learn about Islam, if they learn it through the experience of Muslims, if non-Muslims think that the hijab is oppressive, when they have stories about how Muslim women were able to get liberated from, this was the experience in Iran right after the revolution. There were parents who prevented their daughters from going out to work because they said their daughters would be mixing with strange men. But then after the revolution, when the hijab became mandatory, then there were fewer excuses for the parents to use to prevent their daughters from going out to work. Now, I'm not, of course, agreeing with mandatory hijab, but then you see one of the consequences of the mandatory hijab, which was actually ironically liberating in the sense that it didn't allow parents to keep their brothers or fathers or husbands to keep their women at home. So it is these kinds of experiences that teach us something about how complicated life can be, which we will learn. We would think that things are a lot simpler if we simply looked at the text. We won't, understand these nuances. Okay, do we have any more comments?
Yeah, no, it's not on hijab. It's actually interfaith dialogue things. I'm done with hijab part. So the point is what Adib was saying, and he actually mentioned as well as he identified one of the point that I wanted to make sense is the question of power. And see, when Muslims and non-Muslims, they sit for a dialogue, it's actually either they're forced to sit for a dialogue, so there is a power system works there, or there is a voluntary approach of going for that dialogue. So I'm more interested about that voluntary approach, where people from different communities and ethnic groups and racial groups would come together and sit and can talk. But in that process, there is a soft power that we never talk about, or we
we usually do not talk about. That's the representation of history, because movies actually choose a story topic and take the resource from history, mostly in the past, and they try to explain it in the present. And they explain it in a way that often create distance. But there are movies also that can focus and could explain the history in a way that could bridge those differences. So maybe when it comes to the question of interfaith dialogue, we could also start having a conversation with that how we are explaining the history. Are we explaining the history with a focus to divide, or are we going to use, explain and present the history with a focus to collaborate and allow coexistence of different opinions? That's a challenging job, of course, but I think that's a job that a filmmaker could take, because a video allows a lot to do compared to a book or a text. So that was the point that I wanted to add, with thanks to Adib for bringing that point in the discussion. Thank you, and have a good day, all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, wait just a minute. You're not leaving yet, so just wait.
Yes.
Thank you, Asif.
Please
I'm here.
stay
There's
here
one more
for a final group photo. But Amen.
Great. Thank you very much, Person Tajahal, to everybody here, and Assalamu alaikum for all the Muslim brothers and sisters. I would like to add a few points or some questions which was raised here, which is very interesting. Regarding, first of all, the film in the East, why it's not so present compared, like, for example, to Hollywood. I think this is a little bit simple explained from my point of view, that through the distance and the presence of Islam in the East countries, like, for example, in Hong Kong, Japan, or in Taiwan, that is not so much present yet. But it's, I think, I'm feeling it's coming slowly. But, for example, I was living in Germany for around 17 years. If we look, for example, to the history of Europe, or to Germany or UK, for example, or even the American, that they brought actually the foreigner from Turkey, from North Africa, to Germany to build up the country after the World War. And this is actually how it comes that we got a lot of Muslim people or foreigner there, which make it that you can see the presence of Islam in these countries, where they get in conflict a lot with this things, because it was kind of new culture and new religion for them. And for the people who are not familiar with things which are new to them, they always feel a little bit afraid. But the thing is that nowadays we moved so far that we are living in a democracy in a lot of countries in the world, and where the government is teaching us to learn from our mistakes in the history. And this is one of the interesting points which the brother before mentioned regarding the history, when we look back to the history and present the history. And one of the questions I would like to raise is like how we look to the history and which kind of resources we take for the history if you talk about the history. Because from my point of view, always the winner of the war in the history, they write the history by themselves from my point of view. So how they present, for example, the Islam or other countries, or even like, for example, if we look just simply to the Hollywood, if we look how they present, for example, Arabic people in the movies, or how they present even Russian or even, for example, Chinese or Taiwanese in the movies, like, for example, the Russian guy, he's always a kind of aggressive person, and the Chinese person is kind of, sorry for this, but is not really catching up what the American guy is saying. And the Arabic person always wear the jalabi, or like kind of the traditional clothes, and is kind of has also very strong accent. He cannot speak English well or whatever. So subconsciously, the people will always observe, the Muslim person is always on camels and like in the Sahara, and the African people or like running around, and subconsciously absorb. I mean, the history, I mean, the film is kind of arts, like to show something which is a little, for sure, great. But the thing is that the people nowadays, the human being, we are kind of out than the positive things. So our resources for nowadays, we live in a situation where we consume a lot of Netflix movies and negative news, and we don't make our own researches. And I see a very big issue, because we should, through this multicultural and the globalization, we have an import and export of products. So you get in touch with different countries, cultures, religions. So if you get products from other people, why not even learning a little bit or making own researches about this kind of people where you buy products from them and so on. So this is like important, where I think we should try to move from the position that we take our resources like Hollywood or anything else like that, even like documentary, because it depends on who is making this documentaries, researchers, to go deeper into the internet or wherever to try to make own experiences and to read through this, because this is one of the major issues I see nowadays, especially in Germany, that from my point of view, there's kind of ignorance, because to a certain level Germany you can feel like every third person is a foreigner. And it is many people who are Muslim right now are already children. I mean, people who got married and got children who are born in Germany are Muslim. So Islam became part of Germany or in other countries as well. So we are not talking about something which is not known. It's part of the new culture of this country. So that is what I want to say, that we should motivate ourselves to search by ourselves and get to own experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that intervention.
I think it's already 9:30. We don't want to exhaust our working team. They have been here for 3 whole days. Farid, if you allow me, I would like to say a few words as a final closing remark. I really appreciate everyone's participation, your contribution, your effort. Originally, we wanted this. We wanted to establish a dialogue among Muslims and also across Muslim and non-Muslims. In the very beginning, we wanted more audience from Taiwan to understand Muslim communities in Taiwan and also coming to Taiwan from different countries. Because we have students from Middle East, from Southeast Asia. We also have local migrant workers. We also have descendants from previous Muslim, but now they are synthesized. But to me, more importantly, is not to only know more about Muslim stories, because I think we have witnessed the power relations. Actually, when we say power relations, we say power, it is not only the power to tell stories, but the power we exert within our societies, the unequal power relations between men and women, between majority and minorities. If the majority is Muslim, then the minority might be Indian and Chinese or Aboriginal people. Are they visible? Okay, or there might be Muslims, majority sex and minority sex. Okay, of course we have Hindu oppressing Muslims in India, that's obvious. Or so I think the courage to do self-criticism on the basis of equality, every living being is equal, men and women, and of different ethnic group, different religious background, we share the same society. Can we face them? Can we face the systemic inequality or self-justification? This is whatever I have been discussing with my students. And also, I also would like them or our audience or our readers, if we write articles or research papers, to know that there are problems in our societies, contemporary society. They are contingent of historical processes. Some legal stipulation, they are determined at one historical point. basing on the power relation of that historical point, and that doesn't necessarily need to continue. And we, facing our problems, we should try to adjust and try to correct, or in whatever forms. So cinema could be one. If we do not celebrate our culture, but we examine and we review the problems, so that the rigid system could be loosened up, so that women can develop their potential and not to feel any limitation, or men of minority groups, and so on. So that needs collaboration of different culture, different religious background. So I think that is the real collaboration or dialogue, cross local dialogue, that we can contribute. But the non-Muslim reactions from last session, I think it's obvious. People are very discontent about some reactions, okay, from the floors, that they don't understand why, okay, it's still like this way. So, but this is, I started with students. Everything is initiated and researched and curated by our students, Muslim and non-Muslims. Okay, of course we have Muslim students, but we have also non-Muslim students. So we really want to thank their efforts, especially Jiani. She's not a Muslim, but she researched the background of every keynote speakers, and also film. And we discussed together with Nura, Miftah, and our Chinese student, Vietnamese student, they are not Muslim. So they wanted to understand more. They also wanted more people to understand Muslim, but not one rigid Muslim, but the emancipatory thoughts or possibilities, and the love and peace loving, and the equality persisting principles, and like that. Okay, so, but I think we have achieved a lot over these 3 days. So we want to thank every one of you. We'll see you next time. I don't know when, but sometime, somewhere. Okay, take care.
Thank you, Joyce.